Anyway, what you guys are in New York next week for the launch, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. And books start getting delivered to folks on the print side when, and then audiobooks and then all the other stuff that goes along, because it's a pretty complicated process.
Amazon just told me that mine's arriving Monday.
Right on. Because
So
I placed my order ages ago, so I don't know when it's coming, but
So it's literally printed as we speak. When we literally just like 2 days ago, we were still doing last edits. Now the printing machine should be
printing machine's humming away
rolling as we speak.
Yeah.
And we hope that Sunday on the Brooklyn Book Festival, we will have actually a box of physical copies.
Oh, how cool is
So we
that?
can film a little unboxing event at the Brooklyn Book Festival. So
That's so cool, guys. Firstly, I'm really proud of you guys, and also a massive fan in terms of the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
So some congrats. It's a shame I'm not going to be in New York next week for New York Climate Week. I'm prioritizing family, and it's school holidays. We're in the midterm school holidays, and so we're actually my wife. I said, "Oh, we're going to Croatia over the September bit. I've got New York Climate Week." She looked at me and she's just like,
"No, not happening."
No, and I was like, "Don't worry, I got that look, man."
The evil eye, yeah. There's no words.
Divorce is going to be way more expensive, fool. And I was like, "Yep, no problems." So yeah, so good. All right, so I kind of had an idea, but I'm very, very fluid, as you guys know. But I don't want to make it like a book review. I just want to, I want to give you guys this platform, right? We've got overlapping platforms, right? And Stephen, your audience and my audience, I think, are going to have a bit of a Venn diagram, a lot of the same folks. But the consistency in terms of we're churning out stuff every other day. So like people are like continuously fed. One guy said, "Oh, dude, I get what you're doing. You're flooding the zone," and it's exactly what we're trying to do. So we want people to receive it, and everyone's busy, but like I want them to receive this content and say, "Oh, wow, this is really innovative." And this will be our first kind of plug for any product and or book. So it will stand out from the rest of the kind of stuff that we do. So what I thought was introducing you guys, maybe continue the not to continue, but use the continuum of the carbon like paradoxes that we've discussed on the previous podcast, and then ask you guys to talk about the genesis of the book, and then tell us around why storytelling around this kind of fictional component was the best medium in your view to crystallize effectively these very nuanced discussions that we always have around carbon, right? Because it made it real when I read it. Right, the version
I
that you
think
sent
that's
to
the
me
feedback you're really getting. That's the feedback we're getting from a lot of people. They say nothing in this book is actually new. It's these debates are old and we have heard them all. But what is totally new is that you can actually experience the debates. It's not just your brain reading and
because you gave it
computing
context, right?
but
Like it's like
you're in the book. You're actually it's. I think what happens is we are talking to different brain regions here. Not only your analytical brain, which tries to understand additionality and leakage and permanence and durability and all those topics that are very, very heavy on one part, but here you are inside a story with dialogues and people gets the heart, if you will. It's of course different.
But I was also saying, man, you're also in the heart as well, right?
Yeah,
like it pulls at the heartstrings. It makes
it. Guys are suffering and they are not getting it, and then they're fighting and they have emotions and they're getting angry and they're getting pissed and somebody's betraying. So I think it touches much more feelings, but
it's more empathetic, and I think it's more human as a result. Do you know?
That's what at least people say.
Yeah, so I think so that is fantastic, and maybe that was our cold open, right? But the great thing here is that it could also traverse into a much wider audience, because I can see. So my daughter's 5, right? So we do bedtime stories and we read, and storytelling is this great oral tradition that we have as a species, right? And we learn through storytelling, right? Firstly, when we're little, our mums and dads read to us, but then later on, as we begin to read, the world opens up, and then we start to learn through this context. And it's these stories have context. They have a structure to it. And then there's the pathos, like the payoff piece, right? And that's the kind of emotional hook. That's what binds us to, and really makes those memories or like that story resonate in our minds and in our hearts. And I think that's the cool thing of what you've done here.
Yeah, there's
and
a great book called
something I experienced when working in carbon. Where do I actually get my knowledge from and my basically the things I'm talking about? It's typically not what I've read in some paper. It's the experiences when I was out in Kenya or out in Zimbabwe or out in Indonesia on the field talking to the people. That's when you actually learn much deeper than just if I read a scientific paper. And that's the sensation we wanted to transport so people can join us on a journey and actually travel there, get to those villages, join an assembly, go out in the field and see this crazy tourist lodge. Think about that paradox of the rich people funding conservation. Is that good or bad? So all those thorny topics, you can actually feel them yourself, and you can constantly wonder, what would I do? What would I do in this situation? That's a little what we're trying to do. We try to put people into the position to travel and to learn on the ground as if you'd actually been there. That was at least our ambition. Not sure whether we achieved it, but that was the idea behind it.
It's great. Steve, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say there's a great book on this called, I think it's called The Storytelling Animal. I can't remember the author, but it's a fascinating account of how a story is really how we learn everything. Even if we think we're learning it in school, we're creating a narrative in our heads, and that's one of the biggest problems we have in communicating how carbon finance works. Is everybody in the world has a story arc in their head, and that's what they hang everything on, and you have to get that arc into people's minds for them to hang new information on. And in the case of this, it is, I think what Renat just said is he nailed it, because I learned what I've learned by being in the field and not from books. And you're the same. Anybody who's gone through the process of creating a project, it's not what you read about. It's what you experience. And it was kind of interesting when we were writing the book. I was going back to experiences that were 10 years old. That was the last time I had worked on a project on the ground, but I was beginning to work on a project in Kenya, and I was like, it was in real time. The things that were coming through the book were what I was dealing with, and I'm like, my God, it's the same. It's exactly the same. Every project, it's like the hero with 1,000 faces. This is the project with 1,000 complexities or something like that.
Yeah. To me, that's I don't know about you guys in terms of the genesis around or let's call it the origin story about being storytellers, right? But I was never a storyteller, right? But I've kind of had to fall into it because I felt a deep sense of obligation to help to educate the next generation. I'm surrounded by young folks, right? Like in trading, you're always that. And then as you get older, you end up having a bunch of really passionate younger folks that come in and they want to learn. I always gravitated to that crowd because I just think like there's so much positivity and energy, and they also don't have bad habits and stuff. But then the best way is to tell them, oh man, this one time, right? This is what happened. And you tell that story, and that's the bit. And then I'm a bit of a nerd. So I do go, oh, cool. Here's a paper. Here's the thought piece. Here's some other stuff. But oftentimes, and I have this remarkable tablet. I have 1,000 different reports on there, and I will read executive summaries. And then if I get through half of the report, I'm lucky. So what I find is it has to be through conversation. That's how I learn. And then the other thing is, unfortunately, there's a selfish one-way piece, which is the media side, right? Consumption, right? And so I found like, oh, maybe that's how we can get across some of the message. And that's kind of been the impetus of my origin story for the carbon exposure piece, right? I haven't just had the temerity to write it down where you guys have, right? Because book is even more, I find, personal than video, right? A book is a very personal journey for me, right? It's ultimately the greatest luxury because it's one that requires time. And as a dad of a 5-year-old, that is a very, very limited reality.
That is true.
But when you read a book, you go into a world, right? Like you literally just disappear into the pages. It's you're there, you're present, you're physically there, you're in the sun or whatever, you're reading, but you follow into this journey. And I find that is like transportive, right? If that's a word.
Yeah, that was it's interesting you say that, because that was the experience, at least I had when writing the manuscript, in the beginning, that this story at some point came alive. And I have readers who say actually the most authentic and the most moving part is part four, where the whole thing collapses and it goes down. Because, and it's probably because that was part four, and I knew the characters so well by then. They had become alive themselves. So part of that part four, honestly, I'm not lying. I didn't write them. My hands were guided, and the story unfolded. I was just typing. I didn't know what's happening next, but the characters started telling me what's happening next. And I think this is because at some point these people actually were alive. These countries were alive. They were existing, and then some things I realized this is impossible. This cannot have happened. So I have to change it, because this is what happens. And that is really some kind of magic that you feel when all of a sudden you're no longer the author of the book. The book actually lives on its own, and the characters decide what they want to do next.
That's great. That's the first time I've heard of writer express that kind of that giving birth kind of experience, right, to the story. But like it's a hand of God guiding you effectively, right? I've heard musicians talk about that it's just like, well, how did you play that song? It's just like it just came through me. I was just
It
a
just came
vehicle
through,
for
yeah.
it. So it seems like that you were then kind of
What was also
part of that as
interesting,
well.
because we were three authors then, Stephen and Marco. We actually spent a lot of time together in calls discussing about the characters. So not discussing about the book, but who is this, and who are they? What do they do next? What do
What's
they
their
like?
motivation?
What's the motivation? What's the sport?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. What's their
together
pain they're feeling? Yeah.
we built this world together, and it was very important for us to synchronize as authors. That at some point, I mean, I cannot know what's in Steve's head, but I wouldn't be surprised if these worlds we have now of these countries and these ministers and what's happening and all those characters, what they're doing, how they live, how they interact, it kind of exists. This world actually exists, just
Yeah.
not in the real world,
Yeah.
but our world exists.
That was an interesting
But it's a
process.
really great
Oh,
framing, right? Like it's a really great framing kind of structure, right? Using the pain points of ebbs and flows of all of this market through the paradoxes that you've codified effectively, right? To me, it seems like a really great narrative frame to tell this amazing story. And then, but woven throughout the story are these paradoxes. I thought what's kind of resonated with me the most. And sorry, Steve, I
Yeah,
think I cut you off.
that was of course also a challenge. So since you asked about Genesis, right? It started last year when I was in Bali, actually taking a few months off with the family. I took the kids out of school, we went to Bali, and
Awesome.
I started to reflect on 2023. Remember, right? This is the annus horribilis for carbon markets. It was growing very fast in 21, 22, 23. And then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
the wheels came off with the Guardian article on Vera, and then a subsequent series of articles. Like it was like a storm, right? A
Coordinated
storm
attack.
that was basically not stopping,
mhm.
like months and months and months of bad press on carbon.
Mhm.
And the arguments that were used were the same as we had seen for the past 20 years. And what I reflected on is, why is that actually happening? Why have we now spent 2 decades on carbon? It's still the only finance instrument in the climate space that has scale, but for some reason we keep having the same controversies over and over and over and over again. And that was and so I started to see that there are a few fundamental paradoxes that are just very difficult to solve, and everyone who stumbles upon them is surprised again, and then the controversy continues. So from there, the desire came to actually write all those paradoxes down, initially in a
Mm.
scientific paper. And I kicked them around. I asked South Pole founders, David Antonioli, a few others in the space, and they all come back and said, "That's cool, but I have another paradox. Here's another one. How about this one?" So the list grew, and then I started realizing this is not just something I invented. This is actually real. carbon markets, carbon credits appear to be riddled or underpinned with a whole series of fundamental paradoxes. And unless we can put them on the table, we will never overcome the controversy. We will always stumble again and again and again the same arguments. So there came the desire to say, let's write them all down. Let's write them all down in one place so we can look at them and say, thank you very much. Here are the paradoxes. How can we move on? What can we do now? We cannot possibly spend the next 20 years stuck in the same controversy. That doesn't work. I mean, we're losing the climate.
No,
we have to do something.
History repeating. We're just in a time vortex. It's silly. We need to break it. I think that this helps to codify that. Steve, I want to get your input, right? So Renat, thanks for giving us the kind of the origin story, like the for how this came about. And it's fascinating, but then it just kind of flowed, through the pen, so to speak. And then it was this kind of feedback loop of reinforcement with your peers, with the market. But I really want to understand, Steve, because there's 3 authors to this book. Steve, how did you get brought in to this conversation? And then as a follow-up question, I really want to understand the bit that you guys just talked about, that you were on calls and effectively you were fleshing out the characters, like their backgrounds, their motivations, their pain, their experiences. So firstly, how did you get in? And then how did you guys flesh that out? This is essentially the questions that I've got for you, Steve.
Yeah. I asked to get in. I mean, I've been writing about the need to communicate all these, I was calling them uncertainties for years, and I couldn't, and I was doing it in a very nebulous kind of holistic way. And when I saw these 25 distinct paradoxes, I was like, damn, that's so simple. Why did I not think of that myself? And then he showed me the draft of the book, and he'd already written this, he already had these kids and then taking this on. And I just like, man, I want to be a part of this. So I joined, and then, and I kind of did a rewrite, where I kind of had it to myself for a couple of months and tried to tweak it and change some things around. And then it came back, and then that was the fun process, because I created internal, backstories on each of these characters that were different. I was drawing on what Renat had written and trying to create backstories myself, and then write from the inside out, as McKee always talked about. So I had a set of backstories, and then when Renat came back in, we did have conflicting backstories, which was kind of an interesting period. I remember we had a lot of disagreements on Ella, what's motivating her, I want, it was a fun process, because they do become real characters, and we start to think, well, no, Andy wouldn't do this, Robin wouldn't do this, Robin would say this, and and just even changing dialogue. There are some scenes in there where some scenes were obviously constructed just to get an idea across, and you had the characters were speaking, and their dialogue was really just meant to communicate an idea. And we would see that
Andy I really resonated with me, right? Like he and Robin probably more so, but like I loved how Robin was essentially balancing, I guess, ambition with realism. Andy kind of appeals to my nerd side, the technical side, but maybe Robin's more where my heart is. But so I found myself kind of going, I just really associated or gravitated towards certain characters, maybe because of the experiences, right? Like, so I think that's another key component of storytelling medium, which is resonance, right? Like you connect, and it's connection ultimately with characters. Did you draw from your personal experiences or like friends? Don't name anyone, but you couldn't help it, I wouldn't imagine, right? Not drawing from people and the kind of attributes that motivate a lot of the folks in this mission aligned world that we live in.
So it's an interesting question, of course, in that, as Steve just said, the interesting process was that over time the characters actually grew. When I wrote the very first manuscript, the characters were quite weakly built, to be very honest. One reason was that when I started, I was totally unsure whether I would ever finish it. So my fear was that I would spend 2 months, 3 months trying to build characters and then just never finish the manuscript. So I was very eager to try to get to the end to simply find out is it actually possible? Is it going to work to put 25 paradoxes into a story that actually flows? Or is that going to be a complete mess and neither scientific nor a fun story? And as a consequence, I didn't really bother a lot of to spend a lot of time to build up the characters, and that's really where Steve came in, and it helped because he, of course, comes with different character mindsets. So in the end, those characters became stronger and stronger. And of course, one thing, I mean, it's three students, and
Yeah.
on purpose we chose that. Actually, two reasons. One is, and our hope is that this book is read by a lot of grad students currently in their early 20s who are wondering,
Yeah.
shit, what should I do with my life? And in a way, we want to also give them hope and inspiration to say, guys, try it, be optimistic, take the risk and do it, because in the end it's a fun journey. So
Oh,
that's why we
totally, man.
chose students. And the second one is that in a way, of course, that's also our story. We started as students as well. When
I
back in the early 2000s, we
back in
started My
yeah.
Climate and South Pole. So some of the elements in the book are our
It's
own
your old
story.
selves.
Like
Yeah.
we had, for example, we had the help of a professor who was essentially, we were naive and stupid at the beginning, had were clueless, and we had a professor who was supporting it quite a lot, and he gave us such a basement office as well, like in the book. So there's a few things that actually happened to ourselves as well.
I like
So
that
that
because but that's the kind of the role of the mentor, and it's kind of like remembering you too will one day, you know, young and naive and kind of full of optimism, right? And then it's kind of like a stone, like you get worn down over time, right? And maybe you become more realistic. But you have an obligation, I think. I certainly feel this obligation all the time, coming back to kind of my personal experience, of having to pay that forward and encouraging those journeys, because I've been a beneficiary of really amazing mentors, right? So I now gravitate to young folks, and then if I can add value, that's always my lens, like let me support you, right? And sometimes it just is an encouraging word. Sometimes it's just, taking a call and having a conversation with folks to allow them to want to participate. And I think we need to do that more, and it's difficult because in a day-to-day context it's not scalable, and it's transactional, it's ultimately, but acts of generosity like what this book to me represents is now scalable, because a lot of people can take that, and they can take it in a very personal context and read it in their own time and go on that journey. And that's why books are so
yeah.
powerful in my mind. Yeah. Can I
And
ask
to
you guys
your
another
point,
silly question?
so
Oh,
cool.
oh, sorry. Let's digest that
No,
bit.
just
So
just
just
one,
more
one
reflection.
small point on what you mentioned, because the professor we discussed about, right, who gives
Yeah.
them the motivation at the beginning, he appears in the end again. But actually, what
Mm.
the professor is doing, his most important thing he's doing, is nothing to do with science. What he's doing is he uses his clout, his academic power, to convince the NGO and the protagonist to talk to each other. And what we're trying to say there is sometimes people like professors, ministers, people who have office, who hold office, who have power, sometimes it's this out of the box thinking, these creative moments, this it, a short moment of a smart idea. Why don't I connect you and you and encourage you to talk? Like connection, that can make all the difference. And so then this is also a call to action for all of us who are in this space and who are outside of this space, to never forget that even small steps, small conversations, small encouragements, small connections can make the whole difference, and can perhaps be more powerful than your entire academic career in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's kind of like, yeah, just by connecting, it builds a bridge. It creates an opportunity for someone to kind of, go across.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
So
interrupted.
so it was Dieter, right? The professor?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Beautiful.
Was he drawn from that university professor as an inspiration of your old university professor, or does he have a bit of you in it? I guess where I'm going to, my next question is going to be like, I identify with Robert and kind of that pragmatism and kind of realism, right? It's like a pragmatic kind of broker almost, right? So who did you guys like, where's your DNA sprinkled in this thing? So which characters do you think
You want to
more
go
more
first,
of
Steve?
you guys?
Who are you, Steve?
Well, that's interesting. I guess I kind of I will come back to Robin simply because he was, I felt like he was learning and trying to make sense of everything.
Hmm.
But the funny thing is, when I would try to work on Robin's dialogue, I heard Renat's voice, and probably because Renat's the one who identified the paradoxes and would philosophize about them the most. But I think, I guess if there's anyone, it was Robin, because I was coming into a world that essentially, Renat had created,
Mm.
and trying to make sense of it. And I guess as a journalist as well, that's what you try to do, is you try to make sense of stuff and you try to balance it. I like to think of myself as having some Andy in me, but Andy's more he's more of a go-getter. He's a little more of a, he's a little more aggressive than I think I am.
So it sounds like you and I, Steve, kind of identify with both Robin and Andy. It's kind of like left side, right side of the brain. I
Yeah.
think for me, kind of having there was a little. I'm trying to remember. It was a couple of weeks ago that I read it. So sorry, guys.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to think of how to frame it, but basically, I think corporates expected him to deliver, at a volume at a price, kind of thing, and that was like part of my story. So it's interesting. Okay, so like I love the kind of the origin piece. So now, like, we're having this conversation. Today's what, the 17th of September. You guys are heading to New York Climate Week, and you're doing the launch. I think you said was it in Brooklyn, Renat?
Correct. We have two launches.
Two
One is
launches.
the kind of soft launch Brooklyn Book Festival.
Brooklyn Book Festival.
And the
Great.
cool
Where
thing
can
about
people
that
go
is
to?
just it has absolutely nothing to do with the Climate Week. Just
Yeah, that's
nothing.
great.
It's a pure book festival. And I think we're the only climate book at all. Everybody else is just pure fiction, fun stories, psychological stories, whatever.
Hmm.
And that's what I kind of love a lot about this book festival, because we are as far out of our comfort zone as we could possibly be.
But that's good,
And
because now you
in a
can
way,
actually
that's where I
overlap
want
with
to
a
be.
different Venn diagram of people,
Completely.
right?
Yeah.
It would be an
And
interesting experiment. Because
and I
so I talked to a landowner. Can I give you guys a very random anecdote of all time? But I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to get the numbers wrong. But he represents a number of really large, like, and small, lots of small landowners in the United States. And he said landowners, because they're farmers and stuff. Think of thinking commodity trading terms, right? They sow and then they reap, and they harvest it, and that sort of stuff. But he's like 93% of landowners have heard of carbon markets, and only 3% participate. So kind of taking that analogy, a lot of folks have uninformed opinions of carbon markets and have heard of the context of carbon markets. I think that this book could help to serve to educate many of them around certainly the narrative arc of the paradoxes, but maybe we can help to engage some of them to be constructive as the future of the market kind of continues to evolve. At least that would be my hope, for the distribution of your book.
it's so interesting to say that, Rene, because one of the motivations to do it this way was, like, simply speaking, my mother. My mother is
Yeah.
80 years old. She's a psychologist, so she cannot and would never read a scientific paper on additionality or permanence. She just wouldn't do it.
Yeah, way
But
too
of
boring.
course, as many people in around the world, she has heard from carbon markets from the media. And as everybody else, people think carbon or greenwashing, it's bad, the projects don't work, all these negative stories that have been coming out. But deep inside, she knows something can't be true, because she knows that we have been on this for 20 years and we have done good things. So she was kind of like, explain me this. How is it possible? So I thought that one of the only ways to do it is to write a book that an 80-year-old psychologist could happily read and understand, and we could have a conversation about it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what we're hoping for, that these many people, I'm not surprised, 93% of the lenders have heard about it, but hardly anybody has an idea about what's actually behind it.
Yeah.
They have only like the very like black and white, oh it's shit, oh it's great, oh it scales, oh it's $1 trillion, oh it's nothing, like this these buzzwords. And I think that's it's impossible to have a conversation on that level. And that's what we are hoping to achieve, to crowd in a lot of people and just spark discussions about this instrument.
Yeah. That's when I was at Forest Trends, that was my big thing was think about you're trying to explain this to your grandma. And my biggest frustration in this space was the NGOs would always, they always wanted to create content that was targeted to a policymaker or a corporate, and they were ignoring the larger world out there. And I think it's so important to just create something that can help people understand how this stuff works. And
Yeah.
again, when I saw the story structure, I was like, man, this is it. This is the way of breaking through to the larger world. And when I was doing my parts, I was mostly in Kenya. So I was sitting at my wife's family farm, way out in Mudeta, out in the western part of the country, and so I was in the middle of these little villages writing it. And then when I got back into Nairobi, we had this draft, and I wanted to test it, and I was sharing it with students at JQuat, the agricultural university, and it was amazing to see how much they took to it. I wanted to see what they would think because it was people coming into a developing country, and their feedback was just like yours. They were talking about the characters, not the actual, not with the information being secondary. And I also had the indigenous leader, a guy named Peter Kalisi. He's a leader from the Maasai, and he read it, and he said the same thing. He said he found himself getting caught up in the characters, and then he also said that for him, what he found interesting was that he never really understood the way things worked on the buy side. He was a member of, he's a leader and an advisor to the Northern Rangelands Trust Project, and so he knew what was happening on the ground, but he didn't quite understand the pressures that the buyers were under, what was happening on the other side. And he told me he found that very, very helpful. And others have said, that it was interesting to see how the indigenous, how are these communities? So, people who are on the buy side and have never been to an indigenous community can read this and they go, oh, okay, now I see what happens on the ground. Yeah, and at the same time, people who are on the ground can go, "Oh, this is what happens in the corporate world." And something that another indigenous leader, Muhammad, oh God, I'm drawing a blank on his last name, but he also said it was great. He liked seeing a project told from, he liked reading a piece that talked about how projects really work. And he was also, he was I think it was Samburu, but it was just it's so getting that perspective and finding that people like the story itself, I found really, really, that was a big test.
Yeah. I was just thinking, right? And complete tangent here, but if you guys will indulge me for 30
That's
seconds.
fine.
So we went on family holiday last year, right, to Greece, and I got a little kid, right? And but I we picked up a bunch of cool stuff and during vacation. But one of the books was a picture book of the Odyssey, right? Which is obviously it's a really big tome, and for anyone that's read the full story, but it's a classic, right? And but it's got scary parts in it, and but I didn't think a little kid would want to read it. So anyway, one day my daughter's like, "Daddy, read this story." I was like, no. She goes, "Mummy read the other parts," and I was like, "Okay, it's gonna have scary stuff." And so I read it to her, and she absolutely loved it, even though it was scary. She she resonated, right, with the character arcs, right, of Odysseus, the king and his kind of journey coming back to his wife Penelope, et cetera, et cetera. But like it kind of now, but bringing it back to this story, like to me, it kind of feels like protagonists are effectively like the vehicle of the story, and it's through like their choices, their struggles, like, and how they transform over time, that the actual lessons of the narrative are carried forward, right? So coming back to the narrative kind of device, so to speak, like you've called the book Carpet Paradoxes, so you're not like hiding it, right? But you've embedded those lessons through the vehicle that are your protagonists, right? And you've got multiple protagonists. So it's like a conversations that are happening, circumstances, etc. I find that to be really, again, a really great medium for engaging that not only head but also the heart. So, yeah. It's not a question. It's more of a statement and kind of a personal reflection of it. What are your thoughts?
I think that I think I'm glad you say that, because when we had the choice to make between writing a scientific paper and a fictional story, we
Or
realized
just
that
another thought piece,
we could just like
Yeah.
another blog or whatever. these paradoxes are not just theories and figures and on an Excel spreadsheet. These are actual conflicts that are very real, that are happening to people. Like I like this. One of my favorites is this control paradox. This is so it happens not only in carbon, it happens all the time in the entire donation world. Should you control the flow of money or not? If you control the flow of money as a white man, male buyer or philanthropist, you're a colonialist. But if you don't control the money, you could be squandering money and you could potentially support wrongdoing. So it is unsolvable and it happens across the world. And instead of just you can't picture this in an Excel file. It's just a concept that is fundamentally it is impossible to have a final answer to it. So we thought that if we bring that to life as two people discussing and then getting completely angry, it's just the story becomes much more clear as I theoretically describe it. And I think that's the whole, like taking a step back, that's the whole problem of carbon markets. If you look at other markets like gold or copper or whatever, this is a commodity. And it's 1 kilogram of copper, that's the extraction cost and so on. But carbon is a commodity that is so human. It has so many touch points to lives, to people, that I think to explain the problems, you actually have to tell a story.
You have to tell a story.
You have to tell a story. It's not possible to explain that in theory. You have to tell a story. There's no way around.
I've got two reflections, Steve. I know I really want to ask you questions, but Renat keeps throwing me some really great alley-oops. I got to dunk some of these. So I'm looking at my notes from my previous meeting, right? So actually, no, I'll do the control paradox piece because I actually, it is to me like the kind of the central one, right? Like basically everyone wants authority and control in the market. But the system needs a kind of shared governance, but no one's willing to give up the power kind of thing. That's how I would kind of summarize it, right? And then you have like standards and governments and the buyers and developers, and it's a tension that goes on in that. So, Steve, I'll give it to you, and then I want to come back to the reflection piece around commodity markets from my previous conversation. But can you unpack the control paradox from your perspective, Steve?
Yeah, and that one, it's actually the way it's written. When first I remember I emotionally found myself upset when Wanga got upset. When Renat showed me that part, I'm like, well, oh man, why is she so upset? But it is one that comes up over and over again. In fact, I even something that experienced it myself. I was working on a project, another writing project. And do you know Vasco van Roosmalen?
No.
Okay. Anyway, I was working with him and Elmir Sudari on a project, and there was some funding involved, and I wanted to earmark it for education. And Vasco basically said, "You're doing the same thing these NGOs do, But it's like this issue where, it's a big part of. It's so central to all of this. You're giving money. You want it to go where it goes, and in a project there's also a structured way. Any project, the projects I know, the money goes to communities, but usually there's a limited number of activities that it can be assigned to, so the communities don't have carte blanche, but they so it's a back and forth, and it's a tension that it often gets misrepresented, or it gets pulled out of context because it is a way of empowering communities, but at the same time, if there's a community member who doesn't like it, he becomes the voice of the community in certain circles, and I think by pointing out that this control paradox is central to every one of these transactions, I think it just helps to kind of disempower that kind of a narrative, if that makes sense, the way I phrased it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Can we pivot to something that Renat, you said as well earlier around, like you use an analogy of like different commodity markets, right? Like gold and copper and others. Conversation I just had before this call was with someone obviously who's representing landowners, and so his perspective was like, tell me how much of ag gets traded, on like in terms of the market cap and size, like on the physical? And it was like, the answer is very small, right? Majorities trade on futures markets, derivative markets. So it's very much a commodity, right? So and I'm looking at my notes. He said, so Chandler, hey, I'm shutting him out and I'm going to give him attribution
I was
to this.
gonna ask I was guessing that's who you were talking about. He's
Yeah.
by the way,
Green
briefly
trees, Chandler and who's
by the Chandler from, can we say the last name or?
yeah,
But
say it.
but Van
I can
Voorhees, and
yeah, Van
but
Voorhees.
he's interestingly, he's the one who talked about the need to break what he calls the Groundhog Day cycle that we have here,
Yeah.
and that's what we're trying to do. That's his big thing, is like, we start, everyone forgets about carbon markets, or climate falls away, and then we keep plugging away, and then it gets going again, and then the same
And now
new people come in with the same old arguments, and bang, we're right back. And he's like, we need
and
to
the
end.
same genius ideas as before. Yeah. But it's
They
just
keep
version 1 and 2 and 3. Yeah.
everything that, no, we're not building on things. It's like we're taking stuff that failed 20 years ago, and
Completely.
people are coming in with, look at this new idea I have, and he's like, it's got to stop. And that's, so he is one of the one of the motivations I had for joining this. When I saw what Renat had written, I'm like, damn, this is going to break that cycle. It's so, yeah,
I hope
Chandler
so
has a
too.
big part in this.
Good. So let me give you Chandler's quote, because I was like, I'm totally stealing this, but I'll give you attribution. So he said, landowners think of in terms of commodity markets, right? Because they effectively, have growing seasons, and in carbon you plant, so you grow, then you have crediting, issuing, and then you effectively end up having payment, but there's a decoupling with the timelines. But anyway, landowners think of it in commodity markets, whereas buyers think of carbon markets in terms of M&A/equity, right? They're doing extensive due diligence on projects, and they're trying to get it to a financial investment decision. They're looking at it from an investability perspective, and is the project bankable, right? Show me offtake if you're an investor, that de-risk the transaction, show me insurance, all this sort of stuff. So they're getting very, very spreadsheety, right? And then rating agencies think of the market in terms of bond markets, right? Which is true because of the rating spectrums that they have. So he's just like, he said, what is it? Is it an equity? Is it a commodity? Or is it a bond market, right? And then he said, we need to have this conversation in order to define what it is that we're doing here and what is the right approach. And then we need to stick to it effectively. So I'm paraphrasing Chandler. Thanks very much for that insight. What are your thoughts? And then how does it relate to the carbon paradox?
But that's also been there right from the start. They do have that conversation in the book, but I remember when they were creating the voluntary carbon standard, sitting in those, they were arguing, is it a service agreement? Is it a, what is it? And that has legal ramifications too. So it's something, and maybe that's one of those things we'll never completely answer, because it's not a commodity. Mark Stewart always said he always said it's like the art market. Every project is a work of art, and they may be in a certain genre and they may have a certain type, but there is always a degree of subjectivity in that.
Subjectivity. But that's inherently contrary to the scalability piece, right? So coming back to something Renat said, so I'll take the other side of that argument. But I'm talking my own book. I certainly think it's got elements of commoditization, but it's a little bit different, right? But other commodities also have variability, and there are spectrums in terms of quality. So you could have if you have a benchmark, you can now grade against that curve. You could have, you can have reliable, forecasts in terms of pricing, because there's a futures market with a forward curve, right? And price discovery on exchange, et cetera, all this cool stuff. But more importantly, if you deliver a better product, then you have a premium over that benchmark. Conversely, if your product is less in terms of quality, it trades at a discount. But now you have that basis spreads. So that's what I think is the kind of applicability to commoditization. I think that there's sometimes a view that if you commoditize the market, then everything is homogeneous. It's the same, but it's not. I don't think that those two are inextricably linked.
So I think you're touching perhaps on the most important topic here at all. And
which one?
This very question. There is a reason why the book has 5 parts, and part 1 is the dream, and part 5 is the rebirth of the dream. And so I think it's important to go a few steps back and wonder, what was the dream actually? Why? And that's actually the reason why back then, when we were students, why did we go into this market? What attracted us? And what attracted us was not to create yet another hugely complex structure for philanthropic donations in a project with 100 layers of due diligence. That was not because it exists. It's like donations exist, have always been existing. Things and standards and all that. That's never going to scale. You can ask any banker. And so the dream was actually to create a mechanism that could actually really reduce gigatons worth of carbon by simply giving a price signal. But the problem was not everybody shares that dream. So that was the dream of those people who thought that this should happen. That's why we start in this book with a very fundamental paradox, which is the ethics paradox. Some people think that is unethical. You cannot solve the climate with capitalism when capitalism destroyed
got us into this problem.
It doesn't work like that. And so there's a lot of people who just like fundamentally don't agree to this dream and therefore use anything they can to bring down those markets.
And I think that
the bad news is they have 25 products to choose from to bring it down.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that ethics one and many of the other paradoxes can actually be weaponized in a lot of ways by opponents of the market who just are threatened by the disruption to their core business. And it's just a defensive mechanism. Like, hold on a minute, our economy is predicated on hydrocarbons, and now you're telling us that we're essentially going to be displaced.
Correct. You have two camps, which is, by the way, the ideologies paradox. So two camps which are fundamentally against
these guys.
You can weaponize them because you have an interest in defending the status quo / the fossil fuel industry, and you can also weaponize it if you come from a very like anti-capitalistic ideology, and where you say, or perhaps also an ecologist's ideology, where you say it is not correct to put a price on tree. Nature is unvaluable. You cannot price nature, and there is this,
But if we don't price nature, then we destroy it.
Then it's zero.
Exactly. But then zero. We take it as exactly.
If you don't price it, the price is zero. That's the counter argument, of course. But I'm just saying, in this book, we're just
this is great.
I think that's the problem. That's the fundamental reason why this market doesn't scale, because we are still stuck, like 20 years ago, in the same question: what are we actually doing here? What's the dream? What are we trying to achieve here? We still don't have an answer.
I love that framing, right? So can I postulate what I'm kind of thinking, coming back to something you said earlier, right? Just the kind of the genesis of your book. Right, you're sitting in Bali, 2023, and a horriblest, as you said, for carbon markets, and you're having this reflection, right? Like that's kind of like we're now coming through that. That's the kind of exploration of ideology and politics and all the social narratives that have been surrounding carbon. So I think that kind of sits within the part 4, the society piece, right? And we talked about ideologies and kind of ambitions and all this sort of other stuff. Like that was kind of in there, right? Is your hope now, to kind of reframe what you just said kind of before around, your hope is that now we're entering into part 5, the rebirth of the dream, right? And your book could be a catalyst for that rebirth?
Correct. I mean, that would, of course, be the dream. So the book is jumping between fiction and non-fiction. Because for part 5, and Steve, you were with me, that was the most difficult one. How should the book end? Because to name the paradox and name all the problems, that's one thing. But then to think, so what would be a possible, feasible way forward? That's what we actually spent most time on. The entire last half year was actually spent on part 5, and it evolved a lot. It changed a lot also over time.
Yeah.
Steve?
Yeah. At one point, well, no, it's just interesting because at one point, just focusing on story structure, we were talking about maybe, they need to just accept the paradoxes and say that is the resolution. If you look at a film like Terms of Endearment, they didn't solve cancer, they accepted it. And I thought maybe we can just say, that they acknowledge it. And then Renat was like, no, we need something better than that. And then, he just came back one day too with that ending. He kind of he'd go off and be like, okay, Renat's percolating out there. And then he'd come back with something. And that ending was just, it just showed up one day. I mean, from our perspective, it was one day he came in. He'd been silent for a couple of days, and there it was. And it was like, yeah, that actually that wraps it up.
That's great. I think let's not spoil the book for folks, but let them read that, right? But no, I totally, again, maybe Renat, this is God writing through your hand, right? So that's cool.
Yeah.
To the bit around the acceptance, maybe that's just kind of a reflection. Maybe that's why I kind of felt more like a Robin, right?
Mhm.
Because he's kind of realizes his role as a pragmatist, right? Like
Mhm.
he and kind of reconciles the notion like he can't solve or resolve all the paradoxes, but he can still carry deals forward. Hence, kind of his purpose around the financing kind of stuff, and just
Mhm.
I guess kind of come to peace with the imperfection of it. And I think that's kind of where I feel my
Yeah, yeah.
journey
Yeah,
has
yeah, and
brought
that's
me, right? Like it's an
yeah.
imperfect market, but I'm still so convinced around the purpose, right? And I want to devote everything that I have in terms of energy and kind of influence and whatever else and means to this imperfect market, because I feel a sense of obligation, but also a deep love for
Mhm.
the people and the market, and just the impact that it can generate and deliver,
But
and
it's
accept the
interesting.
imperfection, right?
But it's interesting to say that because I remember I had one conversation, I think it was on LinkedIn, with an activist from, I think it was Human Rights Watch.
Mhm.
Though I think it was the guys who criticized some of the Kenyan projects. And I had a post, I believe it was, on more or less this imperfection. And the reply was from this activist, you guys are just using imperfection as an excuse for not doing your homework. And that kind of hit something in me. Like, that's interesting. We have to be very careful that
Yeah.
that should not be what people take away from this book. It's not that we just apologize. Oh, I'm so sorry, everything is bad, but unfortunately it's imperfect. That's not good enough. If you want to counter that argument, we have to go several levels deeper and become much more sophisticated. And that's
Yeah, but it's
why
also about perspective. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with sophistication, but it's also acknowledging that there's an evolutionary process. And like, if you
it
look
is
at
acknowledging.
technology, it's like, well, then are we all failures as humans because we haven't colonized like, space? Like, seriously, guys,
Right.
like, yeah, that's kind of ridiculous as an argument in my mind, because it's a straw man argument, right? And it's easy to throw rocks as well. This is another, kind of paradox
Absolutely. But
from
Yeah.
afar when you're not, man in the arena kind of piece. Like, it's like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah,
exactly,
and it
but
creates
if
a
you just say,
bunker.
"I'm sorry, we're imperfect," I think it's not good enough. But it's this is one of the elements. One of the elements is the acknowledgement
Mhm.
that we're imperfect and we have to always improve. But for
So what's the
example, that
response? To try to educate each one of the critics? Because I think that's exhausting.
Yeah.
We can, but it's also, we can try to take back the narrative by demonstrating that, okay, we acknowledge where there are imperfections. Let's improve those and iterate, which I think the market has done pretty well as a response mechanism to criticisms. And a lot of the criticisms have been warranted, but it's not junk, right? The determination is, oh, not great, therefore junk, right? And then but it's done at the carbon credit level. But the people and the projects are the ones that feel the pain in the end, because their access to
Yeah.
that finance just dried up completely by an arbitrary letter grade in terms of a rating, or by criticism of the project. And now it's absolutely toxic. No one wants to touch it. And if I use that kind of bond analogy, well, junk bonds still trade. You pricing in risk, and they have higher premiums, right? Like, so I think it's kind of too reactive, and we kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater a lot of times in this market.
absolutely. So, but I think
Hmm.
again, the question how we solve it, right?
Mhm.
One is to be very open and transparent. And I think, by the way, that's the problem the market has. What does the market do right now?
Oh, they
Instead
hide.
of being open and showcase what has gone right, what's gone wrong, what have we learned, the market is here and promises that I'm so sorry,
Yeah.
we next time will be perfect.
Yeah,
That's
but
a
Renat,
paradox as well. That's the
That
that's a
terrible
yeah.
paradox
paradox as
because it
well.
will.
But it's kind of easy. It's also human nature. I talked about it today with another client around kind of just inefficiencies of bureaucracies, right? And in certain, I'm not going to name the country, but in certain countries, like you don't want to step out of that comfort zone. So a bureaucrat's going to just do as much as possible, but then, I don't want to lose my job kind of mentality. It's a
Mhm.
human perspective of kind of like it's kind of like the scarcity mentality versus abundance mentality. People are protective and risk averse for taking on too much, and it's just really easy to kind of stay in that space. I guess the other analogy is essentially no one ever got fired for recommending Microsoft Office, right? Like in a corporate world, right?
Yeah.
But oftentimes it might not be the best solution. So what it does take is a certain people that are unafraid to just speak their truth effectively, and they may be right. And some people call that brave, and some other people call it foolish. I just think we need more and more of those actors. I hope that this book helps to challenge, many of the people that are already existing and get them out of their kind of hiding places oftentimes to take up that mantle, and or it helps to encourage new actors that want to change, right? Who are unafraid, and they got nothing to lose because they're young.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I see is a kind of a bunker mentality in the
Bunker.
space.
That's
And,
what it
and
is.
when you sit around when you sit around and you're in the climate talks and you're talking to people in the halls, you have everybody openly discusses these paradoxes and these challenges, but they're afraid to do it in a forum where there are people who don't know what they know because they know it's going to be twisted. And that creates this bunker mentality where I think people who want to speak rationally, critically about these don't want to they don't want to say it where they know it can be twisted. And I think what I hope we're doing is putting the whole context out there so that people can look and see just what is the shape of the legitimate debate. What are because you've got this huge disconnect between public discourse and legitimate debate. And this is we're not even saying we're right on a lot of this. We're saying this is what people inside this community talk about, and maybe take a look at what's really happening before you try to pass judgment, because and then hopefully we'll also release that bunker mentality. Maybe people will be more willing to speak openly if we can mainstream the areas of debate. I think we'll go a long way towards moving this forward.
Renat, what do you think?
Yeah, that's our hope. The hope is that by just openly and transparently having every single argument in the book that I've ever heard of, and that's what and we're not judging, right? I had a bit. Somebody commented to me, Renat, nobody's the evil in this book. I said, absolutely not. Nobody's the evil. Everybody in this book has genuine reasons for behaving the way they do. And if you could also put yourself into the shoes of other characters, and you might act exactly the way they do. And that's our hope, that we create an understanding that there are different views. All arguments are valid, but instead of defending ourselves all the time, let's just have them open on the table. Because the fundamental question is never asked is, so if you criticize carbon, you don't like it, and you hate this and you hate that, what's the alternative? Like, how would you then solve the problem? How would you save
Well,
those forests? How would you plant those trees? How would you subsidize landfill methane capture? It's easy to say, this I don't like, this I hate, this I hate. What's the alternative? And that we hope by having a book now with the entire controversy, and we say, look, everything is here. Having said all that, what are we doing now? What's our next steps now? We cannot just keep criticizing and thinking everything is bad.
Yeah, no, I like that. As an old boxer, that's the kind of you kept dodging and then you counted, right? With that one, I like that. But if I can kind of come back to this conversation, right? Like maybe even I'll just postulate it as another paradox. You've got too many, but just indulge me.
No, there's more.
They keep popping up, but it's kind of like I'm thinking of it like a narrative paradox almost, right? Like, Steve, as you were speaking, I was thinking, yeah, oftentimes this kind of nuanced conversation, like the markets require the nuance, right? We get into the weeds around methodologies and co-benefits and governance and but the public discourse and legitimacy kind of erodes or erases that nuance, and it comes about to I'm calling it like the Instagram effect. Most people consume very, very small sound bites, very small clips, very small bits of info. Like they'll read the strap line or the title of the article or the story, but they don't really do a deep dive, right? Because they're just, their eyes glaze over and they're off to the next dopamine kind of chase. So I'm going to postulate like the narrative paradox. Effectively, it's like this tension between the complexity of carbon markets that the market requires essentially, and the simplicity of public discourse demands. Thoughts? Do I have a shot at getting it in
Very
for the next book?
interesting one. We have to. It's great.
I'm gonna send it to you guys.
It's cool.
But
That's
that's
exactly what
also-
I'm hoping for. People get creative and propose new paradoxes.
Yeah, man.
But that's have you read Made to Stick by
No, I
the
haven't,
Heath
but I'm
brothers?
gonna-
Okay.
No.
There's a couple books popping in my head here, and they talk.
Made to
This is they talked about this a lot. What ideas stick, and they also one of the things they address in this is the, I mean they have a whole list of things that should be counterintuitive. It should be emotional, et cetera, et cetera. But they do get into the issue of internal narrative and what is simplicity. And simplicity isn't just simple. Like this, one of the ways I think this sector has shot itself in the foot is they keep saying keep it simple, don't confuse people with technical stuff. Whereas opponents,
I
the
think that
opponents have
discards, or it's kind of like talking down to a kid. You should.
it
You
is,
should
and
just,
it is,
yeah.
and it's and opponents. I remember I came into this as a journalist, and a lot of the people who are the biggest critics have no qualms about sitting down with a reporter and giving them their ideas of how this stuff technically works, and then you go deeper and you realize everything they're telling you is wrong. Because this sector has been told to keep it simple, they've tied their hands behind their back. And what the Heath brothers talk about is it's simple is about having a clear narrative. It doesn't mean simplistic. It means just making sure everything is in a row so that you have a cause and effect, a cause and effect, a cause and effect, and then you have some kind of an arc. And then once you have that, people can hang their ideas on that. And Robert McKee, when I was kind of off on my own, just sort of trying to work on this a bit, I was reading two books that I was using almost as textbooks. One was Robert McKee's book Story, and he talked about he talked about the just a lot about the psychology of how story forms us. And the other was the hero's journey. I know I'm sorry, I'm doing like a reading list here. I wasn't expecting to do that, but what you're talking
Man,
about is
I just
so
automated the stick. And what was the other one? Story.
the Story by Robert McKee is absolutely amazing, and then the other one is The Hero's Journey by Fogler, and then Made to Stick by the Heath brothers. And I think those three are they're so important. And I think one of the things about this sector is it's dominated by scientists and policy wonks who are almost trained to not be emotional. They're trained to try to step outside narrative, to try to find
Yeah.
truth and to question
They're truth
premises.
seekers. Yeah. So they're
They're truth
yeah.
seekers, and so they try to break away from preconceptions, whereas telling a story is almost about cementing preconceptions or cementing a narrative in people's heads.
It's cool. We could keep talking about this for hours, and it kind
Yeah.
of reminds me now. So but you've got those kind of truth seekers in, like, was it Simon? He's
Yeah,
kind of
that's
a bit of a
yes.
skeptic,
Mhm.
right? A bit of a truth teller. So like there's these elements for all the different parties. I agree. I think, but they're well intentioned oftentimes, and so I don't discount them, but I'm not afraid to have conversations with them.
Yeah.
Right. And so anyway, guys, thanks again. Conscious of your time, and obviously wishing you guys all the best. Final kind of wrap. So Renat, you mentioned there's two launches, the one at the Brooklyn book fair,
Festival.
book
That's
festival.
the book festival. That's the Sunday. And then we have an
So
event
Sunday,
on
what
Monday,
date is that? Sunday
September 21st.
21st, okay. Yeah.
And on the 22nd, we have a book launch event in downtown Manhattan, which we would, of course, encourage everybody to join. It's going to be Cocktails and Carbon, we call it.
Cocktails and Carbon, a man after
yeah,
my own heart.
we'll read some of the book and just have a conversation
We
about the future.
we have mocktails for guys that used to love cocktails like me.
We have mocktails too.
Fantastic. All right, cool. Well, we'll share the links in the post and in the show notes when we share it. Renat and Steve, thank you again for joining
And by the
me.
way,
I love it.
Rene, thereafter we have two more smaller launches with universities, one with Columbia and
Oh,
one
really?
with the Johns Hopkins in Washington, D.C., which for me is perhaps even more exciting because there we're talking to and with students, which is really the main goal is really to inspire the next generation.
Okay,
To
can
get
I
out,
can I
get
can I up
active.
the ante? Okay, so so I'm really fortunate. I'm not part of faculty, but I'm like a guest lecturer at NTU, the Nanyang Technology University. They're doing a course on carbon markets, and it's called the Carbon Academy, and I'm teaching 2 modules, maybe 3 now. And it's so much fun. But these are postgrads. There's a lot of folks that are coming into carbon markets either through companies or the institutional investors or whatever it might be, and or they're just very interested in it, and they're looking at the intersection of where their careers are and trying to engage in carbon markets. I know NUS, National University of Singapore, also has a course, and what I think will happen next is it starts to trickle down into undergrads as well. But I would love to invite you on behalf of Daniel and the team at NTU. I'm sure he would be very, very happy to have you guys.
That would be cool.
To come down to Singapore.
We actually do. We will be in Singapore in November. We should talk.
Oh,
So
let's
we
definitely
plan to be in Singapore and Indonesia later on, because we also got requests from Indonesia for book launch sessions.
I'll tell Daniel, let's do a fireside chat about this and engage with the folks, because I think that's the best part, cool. Thanks, guys. Again, really appreciate the time. Yeah, congratulations on the book launch, and I know it's a labor of love, and obviously now you're going to share it with the world. So really excited for that process for you.
And thanks a lot for your support, Rene. It's really highly appreciated.
Pleasure, mate. Pleasure. You guys are, like I said to you last time, you guys are my heroes. So people say never meet your heroes, and here we are.
Well, your program is fantastic. I'm looking forward to your developing your stories from the field too.
Oh man, Steve, we got to work together on that. Yeah.
I've been doing. Yeah, I mean, I got a million of them. I got people. Yeah, I definitely want to work with you.
We got to figure it out. Let's take that offline. But yeah, thanks guys. Again, appreciate the time, and wish you guys safe travels to New York and beyond. And when you're here in Singapore, I'd love to see you guys.
Cool. Thank you so much. Bye.
Pleasure, guys.
Thanks.
Take care.